The other day I was playing a card game that used all 52 cards, and we were playing with 4 players. To start the game, I had to deal each player the same amount of cards, so I started dealing out the cards one by one. But as I did so, I wondered, is there a faster, more efficient way to do this? I looked at the remaining cards I had left. Well, I still had a lot of cards, so I wondered if I could give each player 3 cards at a time. That worked out pretty well, but I still had a lot. I wonder if I had enough to give each player 5 at a time. Finally, I got down to a little bit less cards. I didn't seem to have enough to give each player 5 more, so I decided to go back to giving each player 2 more. I looked at what was left. 4 cards. Each player could have 1 more card. I wondered how many cards each player wound up with, so I thought back to what I did. To start out, I had given each player 1 card, and then 1 card again. And then I decided to start giving them more at a time, so I gave everyone 3, and then I gave everyone 5. After that, I gave everyone 2 more, and then there was 1 left to give each player. If I add up those numbers, I get 13. And if I counted the cards that I gave each player, I got 13 as well. And so I learned that 52 divided by 4 was 13. The next day I was playing the same game, but this time with only 3 players. I still had to deal out all 52 cards. I remembered that when there were 4 players, each player got 13 cards. So I knew that I could start by dealing each player some more cards than I had started with last time. I decided to start by giving each player 10 cards. I did this because I knew that 3 times 10 would be 30. And then I could easily figure out, since there was 52 cards, and I'd used 30, there'd be 22 left. I thought about how many more cards I could give each player. Well, I remembered that 21 divided by 3 is 7. So I knew that I could give each player at least 7 more cards. I also knew that since there were 22 cards left, I would have 1 card left over. And that I had given each player first 10 cards, and that I was about to give them 7 more, and so each player would wind up with 17, and there'd be 1 card left over. I was able to check my work when I finished, and indeed each player had 17 cards. Later that day, we had 6 players who wanted to play the game, so we decided to grab another deck of cards and shuffle them together so that we now had 2 decks or 104 cards. I wanted to use my cool trick to divide out the cards. Since I knew that 6 times 10 was 60, I knew that I could give each player at least 10 cards, so I started with that. I knew I had a lot of cards left to deal out, but another 60 cards would be 120 cards. I knew I couldn't give each player another 10 cards, so I decided to give each player 5 more. I looked at what I had left. I wasn't quite sure, but I didn't think I still had 5 more to give out to each player. I knew 5 times 6 players was 30 cards, and it didn't seem like I had 30 cards left. But it did seem like I had more than 6 cards left, so I decided to give each player 2 more. And then I had 2 cards left, and so I knew I'd have a remainder of 2. I also knew without counting how many cards I'd given each player, because I'd given everyone 10, and then 5, and then 2. And so each player I knew had 17 cards. Later on, I wondered if this was a good strategy to use for division in general, and I wondered if I would be able to record it on paper without having to check my work using playing cards. So I thought about how I would solve 104 divided by 6 using only a paper and pencil. Well, I could draw 6 circles to represent the 6 players. And I could use numbers to show how many cards I gave them at a time. So I started passing out, and I used 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 cards. So I gave each player 10 cards. I'm using a 10 to represent what I gave them, but I'm counting to figure out how many cards I've used so far, since I don't have them in my hands to know for sure. Then I started giving players 5 at a time. And so I was at 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90. And then I gave players 2 at a time. So I want to start counting by 2s. 92, 94, 96, 98, 100, 102. And I remembered that I had 2 left over, which makes sense because 2 more brings me back to 104, the number I started with. And so each player had 10 plus 5 plus 2, which was 17 cards each. But could I do it for another problem that I hadn't already done out with playing cards? Does it work for 48 divided by 3? I'd like you to pause the video here because I want you to try it yourself. Get scrap paper if you're ready to try it using this written method. If not, you could use objects like I started with, playing cards or anything else. Press play when you're ready to see how I solved. So this time, since I was dividing by 3, I only drew 3 circles. And I thought to myself, can I give out at least 10? Well, I know that 3 times 10 is 30, and since 48 is more than 30, I can start with 10. So 10, 20, 30. If I keep going with 10s, I'll run out before I get to the third circle again. So I wonder about 5s. I'm at 30, 35, 40, 45. I'm getting pretty close. 46, 47, 48. Perfect. So each person, or each circle, has 10 plus 5, which is 15, plus 1 is 16. If keeping track of the skip counting was hard for you, I want to show you another way you could keep track. You could just do 10, 10, and 10, and then think to yourself, what's 10 times 3? And record over on the side that that's 30. If you're not sure if you have enough to give each person, say, 10 more, you could figure out what is 48, the number you started with, minus 30, the number you've given out so far. In fact, if you did this method, you might even notice that if you have 18 left and you're dividing it by 3, you might know that 18 divided by 3 is 6 and be able to finish the problem just like that. But if you didn't, you could, say, give everyone maybe 3 more. 3 times 3 is 9, and so you could subtract 9. You'd have 9 left, and you'd know that 3 more again would do the trick. Again, you'd get an answer of 16. But it might just be a helpful way to help record your thinking on the side, if that's more helpful to you.